Hello, hello, hello. Let's enjoy this journey together of Selling Prophecies by James Redfield. Um, Thought a lot about this book over the years and reread it recently, and it's more relevant than ever right now, and it will help assist you on your journey. I was reluctant to read it, even though I thought it should really get out there because my reading is perhaps not quite the best in pronunciation. And then I had Spirit whisper to me, your objective is to get it out there, not how good or bad you do it. So here we go. So it's written as an adventure with spiritual insights in through it that many of us can relate to, or it will prompt, oh, give us a better understanding. And it's been written in story form to help it unfold so you can understand the insights. Whether you read it as true insights or just a story is up to you. So let's start now. Some of the topics and chapters are a critical mass, the longer now, a matter of energy, the power struggle, the message of the mystics, clearing the past, engaging the flow, the interpersonal ethic, the emerging culture. Okay? So, chapter one, a critical mass. I drove up to the restaurant and parked, then leaned back into the seat to think for a moment. Charlene, I knew, would already be inside, waiting to talk to me. But why? I haven't heard a word from her in 6 years. Why would she have shown up now, just when I had sequestered myself in the woods for a week? I stepped out of the truck and walked towards the restaurant behind me. The last glow of the sunset sank in the west, and the cast highlights of the golden amber across the wet parks. Everything had been drenched, and an hour earlier by a brief thunderstorm, and now the summer events felt cool and renewed, and now the summer evening felt cool and renewed because of the fading light. It was almost surreal. The half moon hung overhead. As I walked, old images of Charlene filled my mind. Was she still beautifully intense? How would time have changed her? And what was I to think of this manuscript she had mentioned, this ancient artifact found in South America that she couldn't wait to tell me about? I'm just going to get people to help me keep the lines. I have a 2 hour layover at the airport. She had said on the telephone, can you meet me for dinner? You're going to love this manuscript. It's just your kind of mystery. My kind of mystery? What did she mean by that? Inside, the restaurant was crowded. Several couples were waiting at tables. When I found the host, she told me Charlene had already been seated and directed me towards a terrace above the main dining room. Excuse my reading skills. I walked up the steps and became aware of the crowd of people surrounding one of the tables. The crowd included two policemen. Suddenly, the policeman turned and rushed past me and down the steps. As the rest of the people dispersed, I could see past them to the person who seemed to be right in the centre of all the attention. A woman still seated at the table. It was Charlene. I quickly walked up to her. Charlene, what's going on? Is anything wrong? She tossed her head back in a mock of exploration and stood up, flashing her famous smile. I noticed that her hair was perhaps different, but her face was exactly as I remembered it. Small, delicate features, wide mouth, and huge blue eyes. You couldn't believe it, she said, pulling me into a friendly hug. I went to the restroom for a few minutes ago, and while I was gone, someone stole my briefcase. What was in it? Nothing of importance, just some books and some magazines I was taking along my trip. It's crazy. The people at the other table told me someone just walked in, picked it up, and walked out. They gave the police a description, and the officers said they would search the area. Maybe I should look for them. No, no, let's forget about it. I don't have much time, and I want to talk to you. I nodded, and Charlene suggested we sit down. A waiter approached, so we looked over the menu and gave him our order. Afterwards, we spent 10-15 minutes chatting in general. I tried to underplay myself imposed isolation, but Charlene picked up on my vagueness. She leaned over and gave me a smile again. So, what's really going on with you? She asked. I looked at her eyes, at the intense way she was looking at me. You want the whole story immediately, don't you? Always, she said. Well, the truth is, I'm taking some time for myself right now and staying at the lake. I've been working hard and I'm thinking about changing direction in my life. I remember you talking about the lake. I thought you had your sister had to sell it. Not yet, but the problem is property taxes. Because the land is so close to the city, the taxes keep increasing. She nodded. So what are you going to do next? I don't know yet. Something different. She gave me an intriguing look. Sounds as if you're at restless as everyone else. I suppose, I said. Why do you ask? It's the manuscript. There was a silence as I returned to gaze at her. Tell me about this manuscript, I said. She leaned back in her chair as if to gather her thoughts, then looked at me in the eye again. I mentioned on the phone, I think, that I had left the newspaper several years ago and joined a research firm that investigates culture and demographic changes for the UN. My last assignment was in Peru. While I was there completing some research at the University of Limba, I kept hearing rumours about an old manuscript that had been discovered, only no one could give me any details, not even at the Department of Archaeology. And when I contacted the government about it, they denied any knowledge whatsoever. One person told me that the government was actually working to suppress this document for some reason, although again he had no direct knowledge. You know me, she continued. I'm curious. When my assignment was over, I decided to stay around for a couple of days to see what I could find out. At first, everything led I pursued turned out to be another dead end. But then, while I was eating lunch in a cafe outside of Limba, I noticed a priest watching me. After a few minutes, he walked over and admitted that he had heard me inquiring about the manuscript earlier that day. He wouldn't reveal his name, but agreed to answer all my questions. She hesitated for a moment, still looking at me intensely. He said the manuscript dates back to about 600 BC. It predicts a massive transformation in human society. Beginning when, I asked? In the last decades of the 20th century. Now? Yes, now. What kind of transformation is it supposed to be? I asked. She looked embarrassed for a moment. Then, with force, she said, the priest told me it's a kind of resistance in consciousness, occurring very slowly. It's not religious in nature, but it is spiritual. We discover something new about human life on this planet, about what our existence means. And according to the priest, this knowledge will alter human culture dramatically. She paused again and then added, excuse me. The priest told me the manuscript is divided into segments or chapters, each devoted to a particular insight into life. The manuscript predicts that in this time period, human beings will begin to grasp these insights in sequence, one insight, then another. As we move from where we are now to a complete spiritual culture on earth. I shook my head and raised my eyebrows. Do you really believe all this? Well, she said, I think. Look around, I interrupted, pointing at the crowd sitting at the room below us. This is the real world. Do you see anything changing out there? Just as I said that, an angry remark erupted from the table near the far wall. A remark I couldn't understand, but which was loud enough to hush an entire room. At first, I thought the disturbance was another robbery, but then I realised it was only an argument. A woman appearing to be in her 30s was standing up, staring at a man seated across from her. No, she yelled. The problem is, this relationship is not happening the way I wanted. Do you understand? It's not happening. She composed herself, tossed her napkin on the table, and walked out. Charlene and I stared at each other, shocked that the outburst had occurred at the very moment we were discussing people below us. Finally, Charlene nodded towards the table where the man remained alone and said, "It's real. It's the real world that's changing." "How?" I asked, still off balance. "The transformation is beginning with the first insight, and according to the priest, this insight always surfaces unconsciously at first as a profound sense of restlessness." Restlessness? Yes. What are we looking for? That's just it. At first, we aren't sure. According to the manuscript, we're beginning to glimpse an alternative kind of experience. Moments in our life that feel different somehow, more intense and inspiring. But we don't know what this experience is or how to make it last. And when it ends, we're left feeling dissatisfied and restless, with a life that seems ordinary again. You think this restlessness was behind this woman's anger? Yes, she's just like the rest of us. We're all looking for more fulfillment in our lives, and we don't want to put up with anything that seems to bring us down. This restless searching is what's behind the me first attitude that has characterized recent decades and is affecting everyone from Wall Street to street gangs. She looked directly at me, and when it comes to relationships, we're so demanding that we're making them nearly impossible. Her remark brought me back to a memory of my last two relationships. Both had begun intensely, and both within a year had failed. When I focused on Charlene again, she was waiting patiently. "What exactly are we doing to our remote romantic relationships?" I asked. "I talked with the priest a long time about this," she replied. "He said that when both partners in a relationship are overly demanding, when each expects the other to live his or her way in the world, to always be there to join in his or her chosen activities, an ego battle inevitably develops." What she said struck home. My last two relationships had indeed degenerated into power struggles. In both situations, we found we had found ourselves in conflict of agendas. The pace had been too fast. We had too little time to coordinate our different ideas about what to do, where to go, what interests to pursue. In the end, the issue of who would lead, who would determine the direction for the day, had become and had become very difficult. Because of this control battle, Charlene continued, the manuscript says we will find it very difficult to stay with the same person for any length of time. "This doesn't seem very spiritual," I said. That's exactly what I told the priest, she replied. He said to remember that while most of society recent ills can be traced to the restlessness and searching, this problem is temporary and will come to an end. Finally, becoming conscious of what we are actually looking for, of what this other, more fulfilling experience really is. When we grasp it fully, we'll have attained the first insight. Our dinner arrived, so we paused for several minutes. As the waiter poured more wine and to taste each other's food, when she reached across the table to take a bite of the salmon on my plate, Charlene wrinkled her nose and giggled. I realised how easy it is. I realised how easy it was to be with her. Okay, I said, what is this experience we're looking for? What is the first insight? She hesitated, as if though unsure how to begin. This is hard to explain, she said, but the priest put it in this way. He said the first insight occurs when we become conscious of the coincidences in our lives. She leaned towards me. Have you ever had a hunch or an intuition concurring that something you wanted to do, some course you wanted to take in your life, and wondering how it might happen? And then, after you have half forgotten about it and focused on other things, you suddenly meet someone or read something or went somewhere that led to the very opportunity you envisioned. Well, she continued, according to the priest, these coincidences are happening more and more frequently, and that when they do, they strike us as beyond what would be expected by pure chance. They feel destined, as though our lives had been guided by some unexplained force. The experience induced as a feeling of mystery and excitement. As a result, we were feeling more alive. The priest told me that this is the experience that we've glimpsed. We are now trying to manifest all the time. More people every day are convinced that the mystery movement is real and that it means something, that something else is going on beneath every day of our life. This awareness is the first insight. She looked at me unexpectedly, but I said nothing. Don't you see? She asked. The first insight is reconsideration of the inherent mystery that surrounds our individuals' lives on this planet. We are experiencing these mystery coincidences, and even though we don't understand them yet, we know they are real. We are sensing again, as in our childhood, that there is another side of life that we have to yet discover, some other process operating behind the scenes. Any of it sounding sort of familiar in your own life yet? Charlene leaned further towards me, gesturing with her hands as she spoke. "You're really into this, aren't you?" I asked. "I can remember a time," she said sternly, "when you talked about these very kinds of experiences." Her comment jolted me. She was right. There had been a period of time in my life where I had indeed experienced such coincidences and had even tried to understand them psychologically. Somewhere along the way, my view had changed. I had begun to regard such perceptions as immature or unrealistic for some reason, and I had stopped even noticing. I looked directly at Charlene, then said defensively, "I was probably reading Easter philosophy or Christian mystics at that time." "That's what you remember? Anyway, what you're calling the first insight has been written about many times, Charlene. Why? What's different now? How is a perception of mysterious occurrence going to lead to a culture transformation?" Charlene looked down at the table for an instant, then back at me. "Don't misunderstand me," she said. "Certainly, this consciousness has been experienced and described before. In fact, the priest made a point of saying the first insight wasn't new. He said individuals have been aware of the unexplained coincidences throughout history, that this had been the perception behind many great attempts at philosophy and religion. But the difference now lies in the numbers. According to the priest, the transformation is occurring now because of the number of individuals having this awareness all at the same time." "What did he mean exactly?" I asked. "He told me the manuscript said the number of people who are conscious of such coincidences would begin to grow dramatically in the sixth decade of the 20th century. He said that this growth would continue until sometime near the beginning of the following century, when we would reach a specific level of such individuals, a level I think of as a critical mass. The manuscript predicts," she went on, "that once we reach this critical mass, the entire culture will begin to take these coincidental experiences seriously. We will wonder in mass what mysterious process underlies human life on this planet. And it will be this question asked at the same time by enough people that will allow the other insights to also come into consciousness. Because according to the manuscript, when a significant number of individuals seriously question what's going on in life, we will begin to find out. The other insights will be revealed, one after another." She paused to take a bite of her food. "And when we grasp the other insights," I said, "then the culture will shift." "That's what the priest told me," she said. I looked at her for a moment, contemplating the idea of a critical mass, then said, "You know, all of this sounds awfully sophisticated for a manuscript written in 600 BC. "I know," I replied. "I raised that question myself." But the priest assured me that the scholars who first translated the manuscript were absolutely convinced of its authenticity, mainly because it was written in Arabic, the same language in which much of the Old Testament was written. Arabic in South America? How did it get there in 600 BC? It's 2020 right now, and there's a whole lot of us asking questions about what the government's doing at the moment. How interesting. The priest didn't know. Does his church support the manuscript? I asked. No, she said. He told me that most of the clergy were bitterly trying to suppress the manuscript. That's why he couldn't tell me his name. Apparently, talking about it at all was very dangerous for him. Did he say why most church officials were fighting against it? Yes, because it challenges the completeness of their religion. How? I don't know exactly. He didn't discuss it much, but apparently the other insights extend some of the church's traditional ideas in a way that alarms the church elders, who think things are fine the way they are. I see. The priest did say, Charlene went on, that he doesn't think the manuscripts undermined any of the church's principles. If anything, it clarifies exactly what is meant by these spiritual truths. He felt strongly that the church leaders would see this fact if they would try to see life as a mystery again and then proceed through the other insights. Did he tell you how many insights there were? No, but he did mention the second insight. He told me it is a more correct interpretation of recent history, one that further clarifies the transformation. Did he elaborate on that? No, he didn't have time. He said he had to leave to take care of some business. We did agree to meet back at his house that afternoon, but when I arrived, he wasn't there. I waited 3 hours and he still didn't show up. Finally, I had to leave to catch my flight home. You mean you weren't able to talk to him with any more? That's right, and never saw him again. And you never received any confirmation about the manuscript from the government? None. And how long ago did this take place? About a month and a half ago. For several minutes we ate in silence. Finally, Charlene looked up and asked, So what do you think? I don't know, I said. Part of me remains skeptical of the idea that human beings could really change. But another part of me was amazed to think that a manuscript which spoke of these terms might actually exist. Did he show you a copy of anything? I asked. No, all I have is my notes. Again, we were silent. You know, she said, I had a thought you would be really excited by these ideas. I looked at her. I guess I need some more proof that what this manuscript is saying is true. She smiled broadly again. What? I asked. That's exactly what I said too. To whom? The priest. Yes. What did he say? He said the experience is the evidence. What did he mean by that? He meant that our experience validates what the manuscript says. When we truly reflect on how we feel inside, on how our lives are proceeding at this point in history, we can see that the ideas in the manuscript make sense and that they are true. She hesitated. Doesn't that make sense to you? I thought for a moment. Does it make sense? Is everyone as restless as me? And if so, does our restlessness result from the simple insight, the simple awareness built up from 30 years that there is really going to be, no, really more to life than we know, more that we can experience? I'm not sure, I finally said. I guess I need some time to think about it. I walked out to the garden beside the restaurant and stood behind a cellar bench facing the fountain. To my right, I could see the pulsating light at the airport and hear the roaring engines of the jets ready to take off. What beautiful flowers, Charlene said from behind me. I turned to see her walking towards me along the pathway, admiring the rows of petunias which bordered the sitting area. She stood beside me, and I put my arm around her. Memories flooded to my mind. Years ago, we both lived in Virginia. We had spent regular evenings together talking. Most of our discussions were about academic theories and psychological growth. We had both been fascinated by conversations by each other. Yet it struck me how our relationship has been. I can't tell you, she said, how nice it is to see you again. I know, I replied. Seeing you brings back lots of memories. I wonder why we didn't stay in touch, she asked. Her question took me back again. I recalled the last time I had seen Charlene. She was telling me goodbye at her car. At the time, I felt full of new ideas and was departing for my hometown to work with several abused children. I thought I knew how such children could transcend the intense reactions, the obsessive acting out that kept them from going on with their lives. But as time progressed, my approach had failed. I had to admit my ignorance. How humans might liberate themselves from the past was still an enigma to me. Looking back over the previous 6 years, I had felt sure that my experience had been worthwhile. Yet I also felt the urge to move on. But to where? To what? I had thought of Charlene only a few times since she had helped me with my ideas of childhood trauma. And now here we were again. She was back in my life, and our conversation felt just as exciting as before. I guess I got totally absorbed with my work, I said. So did I, she replied. At the paper, it was one story after another. I didn't have time to look up. I forgot about everything else. I squeezed her shoulder. You know, Charlene, I had forgotten how well we talked together. Our conversations seemed so easy and spontaneous. Her eyes and her smile confirmed my perception. I know, she said, conversations with you give me so much energy. I was about to make another comment when Charlene stared past me towards the entrance of the restaurant. Her face grew anxious and pale. What's wrong? I asked, turning to look in that direction. Several people were walking towards the parking lot, talking casually, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I turned to face Charlene again. She still appeared alarmed and confused. What was it? I repeated. Over by the first row of cars. Did you see that man in the grey shirt? I looked towards the parking lot again. Another group was existing throughout the doors. What man? I guess he's not there now, she said, straining to see. She looked directly into my eyes when the people at the other tables described the man who stole my briefcase. They said he was thinning hair, a beard, and wore a grey shirt. I think I just saw him over there by the cars watching us. A knot of anxiety formed in my stomach. I told Charlene I would be right back, walked to the parking lot to look around, careful not to get too far away. I saw no one that fit that description. When I returned to the bench, Charlene took a step closer to me and said softly, do you suppose this person thinks I have a copy of the manuscript? And how? No. And that's why he took my briefcase. He's trying to get it back. I don't know, I said. But we're going to call the police again and tell them what you saw. I think they also better check out the passengers on the flight. We walked inside and called the police. And when they arrived, we informed them of what had occurred. They spent 20 minutes checking each car, then explained they could investigate no more time. They did agree to check all the passengers boarding the plane Charlene would be getting on. After the police had left, Charlene and I found ourselves standing alone again at the fountain. What were they talking about anyway? She asked, before we saw that man. We were talking about us, I replied. Charlene, why did you think to contact me about all this? She gave me a perplexed look. When I was in Peru and the priest was telling me about the manuscript, you kept popping into my mind. Oh, yeah? I didn't think too much about it then, she continued, but later, after I returned to Virginia, every time I would think of the manuscript, I would think of you. I started to call several times, but I always got distracted. Then I received this assignment in Miami that I'm heading to now and discovered after I had boarded the plane that I had an overlay. When I landed, I looked up your number. Your answering machine said that you'd only be contactable at the lake in an emergency. But I decided it'd be all right to call anyway. I looked at her for a moment, unsure of what to think. Of course, I finally replied. I'm glad you did. Charlene glanced at her watch. It's getting late. I better get back to the airport. I'll drive you, I said. We drove to the main terminal and walked towards the the area. I watched carefully for anything unusual when we arrived. The plane was already boarding, and one of the policemen we met was observing each passenger. When we approached him, he told us that he had observed everyone scheduling to board on the plane. One fitted this description of the feat. We thanked him, and after he had left, Charlene turned and smiled at me. I guess I better go, she said, reaching out to the reaching out and hugged my neck. Here are my numbers. Let's keep in touch this time. Listen, I said, I want you to be really careful. If you see anything strange, call the police. Don't worry about me, she said. For an instant, we looked deeply into each other's eyes. What are you going to do about the manuscript? I asked. I don't know. Listen for news reports about this, I guess. What if it's suppressed? She gave me another of her full smiles. I knew it, she said. You're hooked. I told you you'd love it. What are you going to do? I shrugged. See if I can find out any more about it, probably. Good. If you do, let me know. We said our goodbyes again, and she walked away. I watched as she turned once more to wave, then she disappeared down the boarding corridor. I walked to my truck and drove back to the lake, stopping only for gas. When I arrived, I walked out to the screened porch and sat in one of the rockers. The evening was loud with crickets and tree frogs, and in a distance I could hear a whippoorwill. Across the lake, the moon had sunk lower in the west and sent a ripple line of reflection towards me on the water surface. The evening had been interesting, but I was still skeptical about it. The whole idea of a culture transformation, like many people, I had been caught up in social idealism of the 60s and 70s, and even the spiritual interests of the 80s, but it was hard to judge what was really happening. What kind of new information could possibly alter the entire human world? It all sounded too idealistic and far-fetched. After all, humans have been alive on this planet for a long time. Why would we suddenly gain insight into an existence now, at this late date? I gazed out at the water for a few more minutes, then turned off the lights, went to the bedroom to read. The next morning, I woke suddenly with a dream still fresh in my mind. For a minute or two, I stared at the bedroom ceiling, remembering it fully. I had been making my way through a forest searching for something. A forest was large and exceptionally beautiful. In my quest, I found myself in a number of situations which I felt totally lost and bewildered, unable to decide how to proceed. Incredibly, at each of these moments, a person would appear out of nowhere as if by design to clarify where I needed to go next. I never became aware of the object of my search, but the dream had left me feeling incredibly upbeat and confident. I sat up and noticed a beam of sunlight coming through the window across the room. It sparkled with suspense dust particles. I walked over and pulled back the curtains. The day was radiant, blue skies, bright sunshine. A stiff breeze gently rocked the trees. The lake would be rippled and glistening this time of day, and the wind chilly against a swimmer's wet skin. I walked outside and dived in. I surfaced and swam to the middle of the lake, turning my back to look at the familiar mountains. The lake rested in a deep valley where three mountain ridges concaved, a perfect lake site discovered by my grandfather in his youth. It had now been hundreds of years since he had first walked these ridges, a child explorer, a prodigy, growing up in a world that was still wild with cougar and boar and the Creek Indians that lived in the primal cabins up the North Ridge. He had sworn at the time that one day he would live in this perfect valley with its massive old trees and seven springs. And finally, he had later to build a lake and a cabin, take countless walks as a young grandson. I never quite understood my grandfather's fascination with this valley, but I had always tried to preserve the land, even when civilization encroached on it. From the middle of the lake, I could see a particular rock outcropping near the crest of the North Ridge. The day before, in the tradition of my grandfather, I had climbed to that overhang, trying to find some peace in the view and in the smells and in the way of the wind swirling the treetops. And as I had sat up there, surveying the lake and the dense foliage in the valley below, I had slowly felt better, as if the energy and the perspective were dissolving some blocks in my mind. A few hours later, I had been talking with Charlene and hearing about this manuscript. I swam back and pulled myself up onto the wooden pier in front of the cabin. I knew all of this was too much to believe. I mean, here I was, hiding out in these hills, feeling totally disenchanted with my life. Out of the blue, Charlene shows up and explains the cause of my restlessness, quoting some old manuscript that promises the secret of human existence. Yet I also knew that Charlene's arrival was exactly the sort of coincidence of which the manuscript spoke, one that seemed too likely to be a mere chance event. Could this ancient document be correct? Have we been slowly building, in spite of our denial, a critical mass of people consciousness of these coincidences? Were humans now in a position to understand the phenomenon and thus finally to understand the purpose behind life itself? What, I wonder, would this new understanding be? Would the remaining insights in the manuscript tell us? As the priest had said, I faced a decision because the manuscript, I felt a new direction opening up in my life. a new point of interest. The question was, what to do now? I could remain here, or I could find a way to explore further. The issue of danger entered my mind. Who had stolen Charlene's briefcase? Was it someone working to suppress the manuscript? How could I know? I thought about the possible risk for some time, but finally my mood of optimism prevailed. I decided not to worry. I would be careful, go slowly. I, I walked inside and called the travel agent with the largest ad in the yellow pages. The agent with whom I spoke said he could indeed arrange a trip to Peru. In fact, by chance, there was a cancellation I could feel, a flight reservation already confirmed at a hotel in Limba. I could have the whole package at a discount, he said. I could leave in 3 hours. 3 hours! So that's chapter 1. Interesting, hey? Oh well, I'll be doing chapter 2 next on the next video. I hope that's sprung some interest. If you want to follow me more, I've got a Facebook page called One Heart, One Light, or Pamela Cece, or with Pamela Cece. Thank you so much for your time today, and interesting so far. Thank you. Goodbye.